This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, October 1st already. Wow. 2020, and my guest is the excellent Alex Dobie of Android Central. Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing great, considering it's we're in a weird time. I can't believe we're in October already, and it's not going to get any less busy from here. But here we are. I'm doing pretty good.
I know. I looked at the date. I'm like, really? Wait, October already? Where did the year go? I feel like
still July in my head.
Yeah, I feel like nothing happened yet. So much happened, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much this year in a nutshell, isn't it? Nothing has happened, but yet everything has happened.
So let's talk about the big thing of the week. This is kind of what I have you on for, really, because it's always nice to get a different perspective than a US-centric perspective. And, you know, there's nothing more US-centric to me, it seems, other than, of course, maybe the iPhone, than the Google Pixels. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it always seems like Google lives in its own little bubble of Silicon Valley when they make these phones. And I think they finally maybe broke that mold and kind of fell back down with their parachute to a pseudo-reality with these. What is your initial quick gut feeling about the whole thing?
So if we're going to talk Pixel 4a and Pixel 4a 5G, my gut feeling is that these two phones as a pair, when you first look at them, are a little bit confusing, right? They sort of go against the usual small plus XL dynamic that we've had for years with Pixels. But if you look at the nature of the phones, they kind of make more sense than any of the other Pixels. Because, you know, Google would always ship these devices with the Snapdragon 800 series. On the face of it, they would be quite expensive flagship phones, but then when you look a little closer, they would never have enough RAM, they would never have enough storage, the battery life was always crap, they were always behind the curve with a number of cameras, even though the cameras themselves are really good. These two phones, I think, as considered as an overall package, actually make quite a lot of sense, and especially at the price point that we're looking at, I'm pretty optimistic with these compared to where I was last year with the Pixel 4.
I concur. I did review the Pixel 4a for Hot Hardware. I've been doing a lot of their phone reviews, and in my review, I was like, you know, you can't go wrong at $350 with this phone. But
Absolutely.
5G, as much as it's not a necessity these days, I feel like if you buy a phone today, especially when you start getting to $500 price points, you really need to future-proof yourself to some extent. Like I know you and I would buy, I mean, we get a lot of our phones for free to review and then have to return, and we change phones all the time. But most tech nerds that listen to this show, let's be fair, there are a lot of very, very good, awesome nerds out there on listening right now. They are going to want to change phones maybe once a year or twice a year, and that's okay. You don't necessarily need 5G right now because you're going to buy a phone in 6 months or a year. But if you are the average person, 2 years, you want to future-proof yourself, right? And so, to me, that's why the Pixel 4a base is a phenomenal phone if you don't care about the future and you just want something that'll last you a long time and does all the basics. But if you want to future-proof a little more, I think 5G is going to kind of grow up a little bit in the next few years. And right now, it depends on which carrier it is. I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US here, AT&T is really not much of a performance improvement over 4G. In fact, most of the time, a little less performance, it turns out. Sasha Segan and his team at PCMag did the tests on this. So it's not me saying that. It's what I've noticed, but I think it's been proven. T-Mobile is really pushing things, and these are both sub-6, like low band, so they're not going to be fast to start with. But I find that T-Mobile is really bringing in a little extra, especially for like penetration. So I feel like I can be in a basement now where I had fringe LTE service where I have 1 bar of 5G, and it's not great, but it's workable. Of course, you know, I was just starting to get mid-band on T-Mobile, and I don't have any experience with it, but that's the sweet spot, I think, because it gives you speed and, you know, relatively decent coverage. And then, of course, there's millimeter wave, which, you know, 10 people in the world are using maybe on a good day right now. So
great if you stood in the doorway holding it right up against
and I think Verizon is kind of screwed because of that. And we're going to talk about the millimeter wave tax, as, again, Sasha always calls it, with the Pixel 5 in a minute. I just feel like if you really just want a phone, like you don't care, you're not a tech person, most likely you're just going to buy an iPhone or a Samsung here in the US. Like, as much as I want you to maybe think of buying a Pixel 4a, it's a hard sell. But if you are a little more tech savvy and also budget savvy and want to plan for the future and don't, like the listeners of this show, replace your phone every year, the Pixel 4a 5G becomes a really great value proposition because it does give you that future proofing on the low band, which I think, once AT&T gets the ducks lined in a row with performance on their 5G network, or maybe get some mid-band going, might be worth it. The problem with AT&T though is that you have to, they whitelist their phones. You can have a perfectly valid phone. Yeah. Like, I think, which was the phone that I reviewed the most recently that was like that? I think it was the Find X2 Pro from Oppo. Has the band, it's listed, shows the 5G logo, but just won't connect to the network.
Huh, weird.
It's just like when you do a transfer, it says it's on LTE, and because it's just not whitelisted. And it's like, to me, that's kind of crazy. Like, I feel like we're going back to like 10 years ago in the US where, every network had their own phone with their own bands.
Sure.
And that's where I think Samsung is so ahead of everyone else, that they are so, powerful in the US market that they can get the carriers to even approve amazingly priced phones like the S20 FE, which I think we need to talk about in the context of the 5 as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, between the Pixel 5, Galaxy S20 Fan Edition, and OnePlus 8T, which we'll also talk about, that sort of mid-priced flagship space is starting to look very, very interesting right now.
So what do you think? Did Google make the right compromise with the 4a 5G? I mean, I find the lineup a little confusing. Like, I'm an XL user, right? Like, I have a OnePlus 8 Pro right now as my main phone because I want wireless charging, and I've been waiting for OnePlus to give me wireless charging to switch to OnePlus, and here I'm switching, and now there's rumors that the 8T won't have wireless charging, and I might go back to a Pixel. I might switch to a Pixel 5, but the Pixel 5 is so small.
It's tiny, yeah, and this is one of the things that I really don't understand about it. There's a lot about these phones, like I've said, that makes sense. But say you're a Pixel 2 XL owner, a Pixel 3 XL owner, there's really nothing for you to... There's no real viable upgrade path, right? And you could even say the same for Pixel 4 last year, because on paper, there's a lot about the Pixel 5 that is going to be slower. There's no doubt about it.
I think you're right on one thing, that's gaming performance. I think on everything else, like, this is the thing, and you kind of touched on it earlier, that I think, and my audience I think understands, but I think so many people need to understand more, is that I think the 765 and G and non-G, and even potentially that new 750G and the 758G, which we haven't seen on any phones, the 8, these chips are the sweet spot. I think that they are the main, they're the current flagship in my opinion. I think the 8 series is now moved into like rarefied thin air territory of performance that most people just do not need, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's taking sort of the all guns blazing approach to performance, where for most people, you're absolutely right, the 765G is perfectly fine for most things that you will need, including a really fast 90Hz screen, including, good enough gaming performance, and everything that you would do every day on a phone. So I think it's pretty much inevitable that Google will probably continue on this trajectory now.
Yes.
Given the track record they have with not, outside of the SoCs, not using the very top end hardware, but using software services and AI to elevate that and to use that as the differentiator.
Yeah, and you wrote about that. I will link to your story. I feel like, to me, that's not a really big problem that they switched to the 765, because the pricing, Google was never able to be competitive because they don't have the volume, right? And they don't have the supply chain to back that volume like Samsung or even Huawei or Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus, BBK Group, or Xiaomi. So I think that they were constrained. If they had to go with A65, there's no way, even if they cut out Soli and the Face ID like they did, they could not have hit
900, right?
Right, they could not have hit that price point. And that price point is necessary today because clearly that previous formula didn't work for them. And now on top of that, we have COVID, which I don't think at the time they were planning this, they knew was going to happen, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's actually in their benefit. But I feel like the 4a 5G is going to be a great phone for those who kind of want the best of modern times and the best of old times. You know what I'm saying? It has a headphone jack.
Yeah. I think, well, there is that. Yeah.
It has a headphone jack. It's got that rear fingerprint scanner, which is a little old school, but a lot of people prefer. It doesn't have any fancy like 90 hertz madness that sucks battery and all that. I mean, I love the high refresh rates, but some people don't really care. Maybe if you come from a 60 hertz phone, you don't even notice, right?
I mean, there is a difference between 60 hertz phones as well. Some, like the Pixel 4a, are perfectly fine to use. Others, like maybe some of the LG phones, feel a little bit more janky, and it's about the touch response as well as the display refresh rate. So
totally, yes.
Yeah, not all 60 hertz phones are created equal.
So I feel like I'm okay with the choices they made for that to hit that price point, and I'm okay with Google, quote unquote, seemingly going mid range. And even with the 5, they're mid range, in my opinion, right? Like they're kind of upper mid range or what used to be called premium flagship territory. And again, it's hard because premium flagship used to imply like the Poco F1 originally, right? That wasn't premium flagship. That was budget flagship in some weird way. But it implied you had the 800 chip, and you don't anymore. And there's a lot of really good phones like the Vivo X50 Pro, the gimbal phone. I think that phone is super rock solid all around, and it's 765G. The Nord, I mean, so many phones are solid with that chip. So I'm not worried about the chipset. I'm more worried about this lack of consistency in the branding and the sizes, right? Like 5 is essentially the same as 4A 5G, but with waterproofing. Actually, it's the same as 4A, but with 5G waterproofing. No headphone jack and a better chip and more RAM. I mean, it's slightly better for sure, but why did they call it 5? Where are they going to go from there? What's the 5A going to be like next year?
That's a good question, and we could touch on that later with the Snapdragon 750G. But just while we're still on Pixels, I think if you look at the 4A and then you look at the 5, and maybe you go into a carrier store and look at both, the 4A 5G might be the one that the salesperson ends up pushing you towards because it's 5G. They want to get you on a 5G plan, but also it's more affordable with the monthly payments. Yeah. The branding for these phones is been just a point of contention over the past year. We've heard. I think we reported a few months back on AC that originally the 4A 5G was going to be called Pixel 5. And the Pixel 5 that we now have is going to be called Pixel 5S. Mm-hmm. And, there was a lot of back and forth because, do you call it Pixel 5? Because then it's a pretty basic phone. And then 5S, Google hasn't used S before. And, where does 5 fit along with 4A? Because it is so similar to the 4A. Whatever they picked, it was going to be imperfect. And, we have this imperfect compromise now.
I'm happy with 4A, 4A, 5G. Like, there's a lot of parity between these two devices. It could be almost be called, and I think they thought about calling them at that point that 4A, 4A XL, right? That's kind of like, and I'm okay with that because the materials are the same. The spec sheet, other than the chip and 5G and the extra ultra wide, are essentially the same. You're just getting a slightly bigger phone, bigger battery, bigger screen. But the 5 is weird because if there were two 5s, a 5 and a 5 XL. So here, let me put my what if hat. I think this is what Google should have done. They should have made the 5 $650, which is what I thought they was going to be because I didn't realize they had millimeter wave. I thought it was sub 6 only. So I thought it'd be $650. That way there's a $150 spread exactly between all three of them. And then I would have done an $800, hear me out, 5 XL with like a 5,000 milliamp battery and millimeter wave, and I would just have gone crazy with that one. Put a telephoto as well in there, right? That way you can justify the 800.
I would love to see that. Yeah.
It's hard. Like, I love the 4A. Like, I was surprised at how I could adapt to a small phone again, but it's only because of Google's software that was so slick and quick and smooth and beautiful. But I'm going to struggle if I switch to 5 from a OnePlus 8 Pro and prior to that, a 3 XL. I skipped the 4 XL as my daily, even though I had one because of the Face ID and all my apps, a lot of my apps not working with that. So,
yeah, I'm sort of mourning the loss of the XL as well. It's weird to not, I mean, even with a not quite super high-end flagship, to not have that larger size option. And it does make me, that's kind of the point that wasn't really addressed in the presentation yesterday. Google answered a lot of questions around, okay, why is the neural core not there? Why have you gone with metal this time?
So why is the neural core not there? Because I haven't read on that.
It was partly cost, but also power. So they could develop their own chip, but obviously it's a separate component inside. So then as good as the Snapdragon DSPs have gotten, you might as well stick with that on board. The performance is pretty much the same in the 765G, and it uses, I think, 20% less power.
That's interesting that Qualcomm has nailed that now, because I always kind of wondered why they bothered with that. Like, I didn't feel it was ever a problem in the older Pixels when they got the update, for night mode and stuff. Like when you had a Pixel 2 XL and you got the update towards the end of its life, and you had that little wait icon.
Little spinny thing.
It didn't bother me. Like I could still shoot another picture. It would just process in the background. And even on the 4A, like I don't really notice it that much.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously they've cut away a lot of the cruft this year. Just in general, obviously, going back to traditional fingerprints, it's pretty brave to do that.
That is
the
odd.
temptation would have been to go with in-screen, but I'm not unhappy about that.
No, I think it's cost. I mean, I honestly, it's funny, Alex, it's so weird. The last few phones I've reviewed and written about have side-mounted fingerprint sensors. What are you holding? Can you tell the audience?
I was trying to get it in focus in the camera. This is the Zenfone 7 Pro.
Oh yeah, Zenfone 7 Pro. I have the Poco X3 NFC. I currently have a Z Fold 2 as well, which also has a side-mounted fingerprint sensor. And it's like, I never really hated it. But now that I've used it a lot more extensively, because it used to only be Sony really for a long time. Oh, I reviewed the Moto One 5G, which is their $445 US only, a variant of the European Moto G 5G Plus, I believe we're getting here. It has a macro ring, so it's slightly different. Like it has a few little tweaks. Anyway, all these are side mounted, and I am on board. Like if I have to choose right now, I think I want side first, in display second, and back third. And I think the back is only because I feel it's old fashioned now. It's like large bezels. It's definitely proven. It works better in my opinion, because you can reach in your pocket and put your finger there, and you pull the phone out, and it's unlocked.
And you got that notification gesture on the back.
Yes, but you can still do the Moto implemented the notifications on the side as well, on the side fingerprint sensor. So some phones do that. I am kind of like, oh man, ideally in ideal world, I've been saying this for a while. Why don't they embed the rear fingerprint sensor under the glass or plastic? And it's a capacitive, they could do that. And have just a little dimple there. Like, on your keyboard, you have a dimple on the keys, so the touch type. And then in the front, also have an in-display. So both. Like, I think that pandemic has taught us that Face ID is nice, but it's not ideal right now. All right. So until we get like Face ID with masks on, I think that I want to see high end of phones, like 500 plus phones, have dual. I want to have a capacitive in the back somewhere or the side, and then a in display as well, because some people like the front better, some people like the rear better. Maybe you can authenticate with both and have more security, like, something crazy like that.
There was one phone, it was one of the Huawei Porsche design phones, and I can't remember which one it was. I think it was the Mate RS that had both, because it was super early in screen.
I remember that. And it was
really, really bad on the front.
Yeah,
it was
totally
bad in the screen, so they put it on the back as well as a sort of acknowledgement that, okay,
I remember that.
If you don't just want to show off, you can actually unlock really quickly on the back as well.
That was the Mate 10 variant of, right?
No, it was the P20 at the time. It was when they were doing 2 Porsche designs a year. It was the Porsche design version of the P20.
Ah, that's right. And then
but it was actually a Mate.
It was a Mate.
They
that's right.
They
call it a Mate. Yeah, you're right. Oh man, good memory there. Look, I think for me, the future is really your entire phone is a capacitive or touch sensitive. It detects like multiple fingers and it knows it's you. You don't even have to look at it. You grab it in your pocket, unlocks. I mean, that would be great, but we're not there yet. So I think it's interesting. Like, to me, this is the only thing that's going to be a hard sell on this one. I feel that the Pixels that they just released, including the 4A, which we can lump into that, even though it's been reviewed to death already, is like a good solid set of phones that are modern. Like, I love that there's no bezel, that there's a hole punch. It looks like you can present this to someone in a carrier store and they will not balk at it, right? Remember the 4 with the giant forehead?
Yeah.
Like, people looked at it and said, I'm buying an iPhone. Screw you.
And
like,
you've got universal, like one of the few Android phones, in fact, I think the only Android phone with universal bezels, no chin, Pixel 5, right?
Exactly. So I feel like they nailed that, but then you flip it over and you see that fingerprint sensor and people are like, wait, am I back in 2017 now? And that's a little hard sell, but look, I'm willing to go with it. I'm definitely looking forward to getting a Pixel 5, especially in that green color. I'm a big sucker for I'm green.
a little lukewarm on the green, but I'm loving the fact that it's metal. And that they're doing metal with
covered, right? It's kind of like remember the what was it, LG G5? Remember it was metal but painted.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining this, and I haven't held the phone yet, but I'm imagining it being more like a Pixel 2 XL kind of paint job.
Exactly,
that they managed to fit things in.
Yep.
It's weird because this is the first phone again another first that I'm aware of that has Qi charging with a metal chassis, and we actually heard this about a month ago, and I was from a source, and I was like, no way, come on, I don't believe this. And I asked around, I was like, no, come on, we can't report this is probably wrong. And they found a way to do it. They've gotten it built into the layer of paint or whatever it is.
I mean, it's very simple now that I understand it. It's essentially just a coating of resin epoxy plastic covering the entire back of the phone, and or paint. You can call it. It's probably a combination. Like it's like a hybrid. It's like when people do the rubberizing of metals by dipping them in like a liquid latex sort of deal. Like it's kind of like a fancy version of that's going to feel much more professional and much more like metal or paint in the final product. I think you're right. The closest is the Pixel 2 XL, 100%. But here the reality for me is that I want the Pixel 5. I'm on board, but I was really hoping that hit that 650 price point, like 700. Because we need to talk about this.
Come to Europe and it does. no millimeter wave tax.
Yeah, we're hitting... Oh, wait. So is that a different version? They don't have the antennas in that one?
Yeah, the European version is just sub 6.
I didn't realize that. So there's actually different SKUs. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So you see, this is what they should have done is, I guess they needed to justify making a millimeter wave version for Verizon and making enough of them, so they made the US unlocked version that as well.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you know, there's a lot of phones like the LG Velvet, like the OnePlus 8 Custom Edition, as I like to call it, that are Verizon only, that are millimeter wave only, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's a tricky situation that really right now only applies to the US market. The rest of the world is pretty much happy just to stick with sub 6 unlocked, and okay, maybe you have issues with whitelisting with certain carriers, but pretty much it just works.
Verizon is just messing it up for us all. And I get it. They needed 5G and needed to start somewhere, but they're kind of bullying. I feel they're bullying the industry and the market with technology that really, as I jokingly said earlier, but I really kind of mean it, 10 people are benefiting from, maybe. Like, if you look at the footprint of their coverage in the few urban centers, the few blocks in each urban center, and the few people who might benefit from that, it's like no more than a few hundred Verizon customers, maybe 1,000. It's insane to me. Like, I do not see people using this day to day.
It's going to take so long to reach that critical mass where it actually works. And even then, when the 5G coverage is expanded over more than a fraction of a city block, it's going to be mid-band that gets you that coverage.
I mean, they need a mid or low band solution in addition to what they have. And we know that's coming, but it's just messing up the market. So $50 more, I guess, is it, compared to the European versions? Or is it $100 more?
Somewhere between 50 and 100, give or take. It depends on which country.
So this is vexing me because I will never use millimeter wave on that phone if I have it. And it's making the price less palatable for a phone that's already competing, as we said, with the Galaxy S20 FE, which is the biggest breath of fresh air coming from Samsung. I was honestly, I had a few moments around the time the S20 started dropping in price and the OnePlus 8 was also starting to be on sale here and there, like I guess June, July-ish time. I was like, what if Samsung makes a OnePlus phone?
They could do it, and they have. Yeah.
They just did. And I hate to say this because I love my OnePlus 8 Pro, which is a different phone, a different league. But I love OnePlus, and I love the Nord and all that. But how can you compete with a $700 Galaxy with a Snapdragon 865 in this market in the US, where Samsung is, like Apple in terms of size and brand awareness and availability? You can buy that phone from any carrier, anywhere.
And there've been a lot of phones this year that have tried to sort of be the Android iPhone 11, the base model 11, and this is pretty much it.
Yeah, because it has the flagship chip and everything. This is totally
and the support and the retail presence to be able to sell as many potentially as that phone.
So I have a lot of listeners that are not US based, a lot of India and European listeners. But to my US listeners, from your perspective, being in the UK, what would you say to them about the Pixel 5 versus Galaxy S20 FE versus upcoming 8T, or if you want to save a bit of money, OnePlus 8?
It's a really tricky call, and it really depends on what your priorities are. That's a bit of a cop out, but obviously if you're into the whole Google ecosystem, if you want fast updates. If you want, to immediately get those Pixel feature drops that for the next 3 years, there's going to be no delay. That it's going to get better every year, and you have the Pixel camera, which is still, even with the limited hardware, still second to none. I think.
Yeah.
I think the Pixel is still a very easy buy. With the Samsung, you've got to wonder. Although they've been really, really good with updates, and although you have the faster SoC, are you going to notice that difference compared to the Pixel 5? Possibly not. Samsung, I would say, whether their camera is better than Google's largely depends on your preference. Samsung photos have a very particular look to them. They're very contrast heavy. They're more vibrant. The hard detail, as a fine detail, tends to get scrubbed out a little bit more, and you have a bit more of an HDR sort of halo effect. But obviously, you got that faster SoC. It's gonna be better for gaming. But you've also got the plastic back, so It's all give and take, really.
Honestly, at $1,000 on the Note 20, I was upset. But at $700, I'm not happy because I know you can get a lot of phones with glass and metal frames at that price. But I'm still fine with that because remember, there's very few $700 phones in the US that have wireless charging and waterproofing. And like basically the trifecta, there's a third one, I can't remember which one it is, but they're like the OnePlus 8 doesn't have wireless charging. The 8 Pro, of course, might be on sale soon, and at that price, you might get wireless charging. But the Galaxy S20 FE does hit like that sweet spot in that sense, and also has triple rear, right? It has a stabilized, optically stabilized 3x telephoto. It's only 8 megapixel. But I think that's still going to be better than zooming in, even though the super zoom, or whatever it's called on the Pixels, is insane. I couldn't believe the 5x zoom photos I took with the 4A in daylight.
Pretty wild. If you look at how good that is, it kind of explains why they didn't go with a dedicated, say, 2x telephoto on the Pixel 5, because it probably just wouldn't be worth it.
2x. You don't want. I mean, I've been saying for a while now that today was 2 days computational photography, and also if you have a large pixel array like a 48 or 64 megapixel main sensor, which isn't the case with the S20. But if you have that, you are better off with at least a 3x telephoto if you're going to go optical, right? Like, and a good example that I was just saying, that the Pixel 4a really blew my mind with 5x zooming, but that's compared to, say, the Velvet at 64 megapixel or 48 megapixel. It's worse zooming in on the 48 megapixel at 5x than the Pixel 4a with the crappy old, like 3-year-old 12 megapixel sensor.
I haven't used it recently, but I gotta say, when I used it initially on that first firmware, that Velvet camera is rough.
It's improved a lot.
It's pretty rough.
Like,
okay.
So I received the original global version, and then I received the US only, like the AT&T version, and since then we've received a T-Mobile version with a Dimensity chip.
Okay.
In the US. So we have a third Velvet now, which I'm trying to get my hands on because I want to do a benchmark, because I'm hearing that AI performance is off the charts on the Dimensity compared to Snapdragon, but everything else is a pretty good match for the 765. And I think there's not much interest because people just dismiss MediaTek, but I think T-Mobile, for whatever reason, worked out this deal with LG, who was willing to make a one-off Dimensity version of the Velvet. There's nothing else that's different about it, just the chip. And it's a little cheaper because of it. And I think that was the right call. And that's what I'm going to try to establish. But what I'm getting to is that the latest firmware for the cameras on the Global and the AT&T model, the Qualcomm versions of the LG Velvet, bring that phone to this is perfectly fine. This is, OnePlus territory. It's not like horrible by any means. It's totally usable. But when I first got it, I was getting oil painting at 3x,
Yeah. Me too, yeah.
Like, I've used enough 48 megapixel and 64 megapixel cameras to know that at 3x, I should get a good photo in good light on digital zoom. So that's why, I don't think the Pixels have to worry about not having a telephoto. And I think the Galaxies do. So that's why the S20 FE having even just an 8 megapixel 3x stabilized telephoto is a good deal. And the OnePlus 8 doesn't, and I'm not sure the OnePlus 8T will either, because Oppo, Vivo, BBK group has gone away from telephotos in the last few years.
Yeah, telephoto's really just for the premium phones in that brand.
It's like they're just going with those crappy macros.
Macro cameras, yeah, the 2 megapixel depth detection, 5 megapixel macro.
Like, I don't mind the 5 megapixel macro because those usually have autofocus, so they're somewhat usable for the 2 times in your life you'll use them. But the 2 megapixel fixed focus macro is like focus hunting by moving your phone. Forget it.
Like the one on the Nord? Did you use that?
Yeah, the one on the Nord. Or the one on the
Absolute
8.
Trash.
The OnePlus 8. It's the same one. It's terrible.
It might as well be a sticker on the back of a phone.
Absolutely.
For all the use it is.
Totally. Oh my God, that's hilarious. The thing that vexes me the most, Alex, is that on the 8, it has autofocus on the ultra wide. So it could use the ultra wide as a macro camera like the 8 Pro does, like the 7T did, like the 7 and 7 Pro did. And they decided, no, we're going to add exactly a sticker on the back that's like a camera, and then made it useless.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the optics of having, the other kind of optics of having a quad camera phone, right? Of having, looking around the back and saying, wow, so many cameras, it must be great, when actually, like especially with the Nord, it might as well just have one camera.
Exactly. And it's the same with the Poco X3 NFC. That main sensor, Sony IMX686, 64 megapixel, rock solid. It's lacking OIS, but at that price point, $250, I'm not going to argue. But, the other sensors, the ultra-wide is fine. It's nice to have because you can't get that any other way other than physically mounting a lens in front of your main sensor. But the macro is that 2 megapixel useless macro again. You're like, why? And why do you need a depth sensor? You have enough lenses already to like between the ultra-wide and the main sensor, you can do depth. Like, what the hell? Like, it's just for camera count at this point, and it's just sad. And you're right, the OnePlus is like, well, the 8 and the Nord are like that. The 8T, I hope. I know the 8T is not going to have a telephoto, but I hope at least they have autofocus on that macro. Please, OnePlus, don't mess this up.
Hoping for a decent upgrade for that ultra wide, because it is apparently the same main sensor as the 8, as the IMX. I mean, IMX 586 perfectly fine, but
586 is getting long in the tooth. Like,
it is a little bit, but it's still fine.
No, I know, but I would have thought that they would have switched the 8T to what the 8 Pro uses.
The 689, yeah.
The
that was what I was hoping,
which is a gorgeous, glorious sensor. Yeah. But speaking of, I know it's a little tangent, but speaking of really cool camera setups from BBK, like camera setups you do not expect from BBK, right? Because, with BBK, you always get 2 sticker lenses, as you like to call them, right? Vivo X50 Pro. Not only do you get the gimbal on the main sensor, which is really cool, arguably gimmicky, but really cool. Because once you see it at work, and I haven't used the Vivo much for video, but for photography, that thing blows my mind for the main sensor. Like, you can literally move your hand a half inch in either direction, and it just doesn't move on the viewfinder. It's just rock steady. But the other lenses are really good on that. There's a 2x telephoto for portraits. A little useless, but it actually works. And then there is a 5x periscope telephoto that's only 8 megapixel, but it is really good. And it's stabilized as well. There's 3 OIS sensors, essentially. I mean, the gimbal isn't like OIS on steroids. And then there is, on top of that, a 4th sensor, which I think is just like a macro or depth or something. So for Vivo, for BBK, that's like unheard of. They went crazy.
Yeah, and it kind of brings me back to my favorite camera of this year that I don't actually have with me anymore. But this is sort of my platonic ideal of where I think phone cameras are eventually going to land.
Oh, do tell.
It's the Huawei P40 Pro Plus.
Oh my God, yes, I have mine still, yes.
It's the ultra-wide, the really solid ultra-wide, which is a different aspect ratio, so you can do video with it, and it's still a really great ultra-wide camera. It's the bonkers main sensor that you get crazy bokeh with.
RYYB, yeah.
And it's a regular telephoto at 3x for just punching in a little bit, maybe portrait when you're standing back a little bit. And then it's the crazy bananas super long
That 10x is unbelievable. It is so good. Oh my God.
Obviously, Huawei has its issues in a lot of other areas, but I think it's been the case for the past year and a half to 2 years that they've basically been at least a generation ahead of everyone else. And looking at that phone now, I think gives us an idea of maybe late 2021, early 2022, where everyone else is eventually going to end up.
Exactly. And, and I want to add again, I know I've been singing the praises of the Vivo X50 Pro for a while, but if you want the economy version of that, where you have two telephotos and you have a really good color science that matches across all the sensors and good results in all kinds of light performance and in general good imaging performance for half the price, that Vivo X50 Pro, you should check it out if you haven't had any seat time with Alex. It is completely unexpected. Like for a BBK Group device, I did not think I was going to love it that much. I thought it was going to be gimmicks. And no, it's not. It's really good. So
cool. Sounds impressive.
It's not P40 Pro Plus good, but very few things are, right?
Yeah,
That's
for sure.
the reality. So anyway, I don't know where we are here. I think you talked mostly about the Pixel. So you're right. I think the decision of buying the Pixel 5 versus Galaxy, I think if you're spec focused, the Galaxy might be your better pick. If you're update software focused, I think the Pixel version of Android is going to be a better version than One UI, no matter what, right? Like, I mean, it's still,
for sure.
One UI is still very good, but even OnePlus now going away from the pure oxygen to some weird oxygen is going to be a tough sell, I think, for some people. I mean, we're going to find out. I haven't played. Have you played with Oxygen 11 yet?
I have, yeah. I have two phones running it actually.
And
here it's so I think a lot of people's impressions were I'll get into a few things here because there are a few different areas to touch on. A lot of people's first impressions of this were colored by a very early developer build that they did not do any PR for ahead of time. So a lot of people's first impressions of this were either journalists, influencers, YouTubers, whatever, getting this super early build with no information from PR, putting up content, putting up videos on it, and it looks a bit rough around the edges. Of course, it's a very, very different UI, and that is a valid criticism of it, especially for the core OnePlus audience. But I think part of the problem was the messaging around it before this thing got out there. Obviously, it's different, right? The default look is very sort of it's the OnePlus font. It's your red, black, white, moving away from the stock Android blues. But I've actually found with the latest build of this, which is basically the final beta before it graduates to a stable release, a lot of the apps, like the weather app, have been sort of retooled, look a little bit nicer.
Okay.
You can change the look a lot just by changing the accent color. I think it looks a lot more palatable if you just go back to the blue, as opposed to having everything in red and black, bright white and red, which is a little bit more of a jarring color scheme in my opinion. So I don't hate it. I get why people do hate it. I'm not about to die on that hill myself. I would quite happily use a phone with Oxygen OS 11, but I think it's just a bigger part of this change of direction that we've seen from OnePlus, of which the 8T will be part, and of which these other Nord phones will be part.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the big wild card here is going to be the 8T. What does the 8T bring? How much do we know? I don't know too much about it. How much do we know about the 8T?
It's sort of this half-step upgrade, right? Which the T-Series always have been. And
right.
What's confusing people this year is half of the world got an 8T Pro last year that didn't have some of the changes from the 7T. Some parts of the world got a 7T Pro last year that didn't have some of the changes from the 7T. So the screen was duller, but it was curved on the 7T Pro. Pretty much, it was just a 7 Pro with higher binned internals.
Right.
And I think this year they made the decision that doesn't really make any sense to make that, especially if you don't have carrier partners on board, which in Europe, they've been struggling a bit with carriers. So makes total sense there. The comparison that holds true this year as it did last year is 7 to 7T, 8 to 8T. So it's a half-step upgrade. You get faster charging. You get a nicer screen, even though the design changes a little bit because it's flat and not curved. And you have some minor camera upgrades, and you have a bigger battery and a faster screen.
But minor camera upgrades, I was really expecting the 689 to be their main
I was
sensor.
hoping for that too, and it's disappointing that it doesn't have that, but then, we don't necessarily know the price yet, so we'll have to...
That's right. That's the other thing. They might surprise us. Instead of like 700, which was the base price when it released of the 8, this might go down to 600 or something, which would really be impressive, I think. Like right now, even if you're looking at buying an 8 for $550 or $600 new, it's a pretty great deal. Considering you have like the Velvet at $600. Oh,
yeah.
I love the design of the Velvet. I just feel like, I reviewed it twice now, and I feel like, I wouldn't buy that phone. Like I didn't hate it, but I wouldn't buy it.
And I feel like, don't want to tangent too much, but I do feel like at that price point, there's a stark contrast between not just the screen because OnePlus is committed to faster refresh rates, but also the software, right? I
Oh,
feel
the
like
software.
LG's software has almost regressed over the past 2 or 3 years
It
to
feels
the
that
point
way.
where,
Yeah.
compared to everyone else, they were pretty much the same. They were nice and fast. They had good haptics. Whereas now they've slipped behind because by comparison, because everyone else has got to that level with, faster refresh rates, and as a result of that, faster touch response. And that's why phones like the OnePlus Nord are so compelling at the place they're priced.
Oh my God, it's so good. It is so fast. I mean, I couldn't tell the difference unless I put it side by side with the 8. And even then,
sure,
it
yeah.
was really hard to tell the difference.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we don't get that here. At least if you import it, you don't get 5G support at all. So I think it's not worth it for the US customers. That's going to segue us into some other news. I want to finish quickly on the news on the OnePlus 8T, which is, we might as well lump it all together and we can talk about Xiaomi for a few minutes. But I feel like OnePlus is doing weird things right now, Alex, and I kind of want to. I mean, there's Oxygen OS, and you kind of reassured me a little bit there. I feel a little better now that you mentioned that the latest builds are a little more to our liking. But OnePlus 8T Pro is not coming. There is evidence. Pete Lau just kind of said it. So, if you were hoping for, like, if you have the budget, like, I would have the budget to buy a OnePlus 8T Pro if it existed, because I'd want to upgrade from my 8 Pro because I'd want wireless charging. Oh man, why can't they bring why does the wireless charging not trickle down? Like, it is not expensive. Why does it not trickle down, Alex?
I think it's a question of, with the 8T, I would guess it's because they've got a bigger battery and they've also got 65 watts. They've inherited that from the Oppo side. So I think if they could probably do 30 wired and 30 wireless, and maybe an ever so slightly smaller battery if they wanted to. Instead, they decided that the more marketable feature is that 65 watt warp charge. I don't agree with that choice, but they got to sell phones. It's probably easier to do that with the promise of faster charging.
I know. It just bothers me because it's like, remember when like Nokia back in the day, in the early days of Qi, like they had it on almost every phone, even optionally with the case sometimes. It just like seems like it would be such a no-brainer to do. And then when you see the iPhone SE, just including it for $400, like it's kind of tough to get around not having it.
It's weird because I think a lot of people predicted that after Apple did it, it would just be everywhere. Like you got every Starbucks table would be a Qi charging pad, and
but it's not the case.
Android space would. Yeah, it's not the case. Android manufacturers they've resisted to a certain extent because the other end of that bargain is, okay, you can have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, or you can have 100-watt charging.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I still feel that once you've experienced wireless charging, it's not something you use every day, but you want it, and you don't have it, you miss it.
Especially if you suddenly get into a phone with wireless charging and you buy a bunch of wireless chargers and you have them in a bunch of different rooms, and then suddenly you switch to a phone that doesn't have it, that's when you feel it. And I think a lot of people like us maybe are in that situation.
I mean, I'm gonna mention a very first world problem here. Is I have a wireless charging pad in my Tesla. My Model 3 is a little older. It didn't come with it from the factory. The newer Model 3s and Model Ys have it built in from Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same location as the built-in one there is third-party ones you can buy on Amazon for the early Model 3s that cost $20 or so, and they fit perfect. They look exactly like the Tesla one. I have that because, my spouse has an iPhone SE. I have, various phones with wireless charging. And that's where it's really been the big game changer for me. At home, it's nice. I have a few stands here and there, a few pads here and there, but I can live without it at home. It's in the car. Especially when you're doing a long road trip, you just put the phone down. You don't even think about it. It charges. You don't have to unplug. You don't have cables in the way. You don't get tangled up. It just works,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess especially in an enclosed space like that, you don't want to be messing with wires. You don't want to be pulling things out. And
yeah. And that's kind of the killer app for me. And I mean, it's amazing, actually. A lot of US cars that are coming out, like cars sold in the US that are coming out in the last 6 months or a year. I'm a bit of a car enthusiast, so I keep track of the reviews. Almost all of them have USB-C ports now instead of, or in addition to A. And all of them, pretty much every single one has Qi somewhere. Or if not, optionally available. Even on I'm talking about $20,000 Kias. It's everywhere. And it's surprising how quickly the industry just flipped that switch.
Furniture as well, right? So
Yeah,
many
yeah. IKEA.
like lamps, nightstands with this stuff built in.
Yeah. Oh, it's so strange. How do you understand OnePlus' strategy right now? Like, it made sense to go with the Nord. Like, the Nord as it exists today, if it came to the US as it is, maybe reduced in price or through a carrier agreement, everything would make perfect sense. But now, what doesn't make sense is things like Oxygen OS being less pure, I guess, if you want to call it that. I hate that word, but or no OnePlus 8T Pro. Rumors that when we get the Nord in the US, although that's not rumored now, it's been teased by the Nord Instagram account that there's another Nord coming to the US. We know it's called, at least it's supposed to be called the N10, but why make a OnePlus Nord with a 690 chip?
I think it comes down to, OnePlus's main carrier phone in the US is the OnePlus 8. And if you release the global Nord over there, I think it kind of kills the OnePlus 8, right?
Right.
So I think what you do instead is you go for a phone with a different balance of priority. So you go with perhaps a slower SoC, a bigger battery, and better cameras. So the one for the US supposedly is going to have a 64 megapixel sensor. I would guess it would be the 686, I think.
I hope it's a 686 because that's a great sensor. I hope it's not a Samsung sensor. God, they're so awful. I'm sorry to tell you this, guys, but like the only good Samsung sensor that I'm really impressed that's high megapixel, and it's only because the way Samsung implements it is the 108 in only in the Note 20 Ultra, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
every other sensor Samsung sells, especially to non-Samsung phone makers like Moto,
LG, the one on the
LG. Oh, they're so bad.
Yeah. So to the other part of what OnePlus is doing, I think it is just software differentiation, right? They're trying to build their brand, and that's one way they're looking at doing it. And for better or worse, that's what's been decided. And you can look at the current situation with Pete Lau taking a more sort of proactive role, with Carl Pei sort of overseeing the Nord line. Obviously, there's been a change of direction. They want to build a stronger brand. They also want to sell more phones because the numbers, when they've just been targeting the niche audience, haven't been huge. They've lost carrier support in Europe this year. So I think that's why, to an extent, they're targeting markets and seeing, okay, maybe this for the US makes sense because we can sell it alongside the OnePlus 8. But given the number of phones they have coming, there is a little bit of a sense of just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. I'm not sure how much of that is true, but they're obviously they want to produce more phones, they want to have more SKUs, and they want to have differentiated software, and that's the direction they're heading in. And for a lot of people, that's not the OnePlus that they know, and it feels a little bit alien.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not concerned about, per se, the changes they're making to the Nord for the US. And as you explained, I totally understand, they don't want to step on the toes of the carriers that sell the 8 and are going to sell the 8T soon. And if the 8T is cheaper, even more so, right? I get it. Mm-hmm. But I am starting to doubt, after using the OnePlus Nord with 765G as it is today, I'm starting to doubt that they can maintain that fluidity, that trademarked OnePlus goodness, that, oh my God, this is so fast, like telepathically fast vibe that almost still is there on the Nord 765G on a 690. Like maybe the 690 is going to surprise us. Maybe the 690 is the new 700 series, Maybe. I believe it's a 90 hertz screen. I mean, it's a Nord. Well, yeah, it is supposed to be. I mean, we don't know the specs, right? But
I'm cautiously optimistic. There is another phone supposedly that they're working on. We reported it a few weeks back. I forget the code name, so I'm completely useless here. But that I think is a much cheaper chipset. It's like a 400 series or something.
Yeah, like
that's the one that's intriguing to me.
$200.
Yeah, like surely, I mean, maybe they can do.
And
90
that's a Nord too. That would be a Nord phone as well.
Yeah, that's the really bizarre one to me, and who knows how that will shape up. That could be a very sharp sort of divergence from what we know from OnePlus.
I could see this for India or Latin America, but like, cheap phones, even $200 phones in the US don't sell. Like even the good ones, even like the Moto Gs and the Poco X3 NFC, which is $250, it would be $250 if it's sold here. Like people wouldn't buy these. They go into a carrier store and they plunk down their signature for another contract, and it's all rolled into one. And you get such good incentives. Like I don't remember which phone. Oh, the Moto that I just reviewed, the One 5G. It was $5 a month.
Yeah, and if you go with a Samsung or something, they'll give you like a whole pile of Samsung branded accessories or other incentives or ridiculous trade-in value to the point where, you know, they're practically paying you to buy the phone.
So why the North American market for this super budget Nord?
I have no idea. Shrug emoji. We'll have to see what form it takes.
Shrug emoji.
Yeah, it's. Right?
I'm just concerned that like. And then again, no 8T Pro is weird. Like, I feel like they still need a flagship. Like,
I think they decided the 8 Pro is still that. If they looked at the 8 Pro and said, look, what else could we do with this?
But the 8 to me, when I reviewed it versus the 8 Pro, the 8 was not a flagship. It felt like it was a super lopsided flagship. It was like the best chip with everything else being meh. Like, comparatively, right? Like, it's not a bad phone at all. But I'm just saying, like, I think in terms of balance, the OnePlus 8 Pro is the
makes
phone
more sense,
to get.
And especially months later when the price hadn't reduced and the Nord appeared at a much lower price. Yeah,
and that's why I think they're doing what they did last year. Remember, we didn't get a 7T Pro, and then we got the 7T Pro.
You got the McLaren edition, didn't you? Like much later, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But remember how they didn't announce it at the same time? It was the 7T, and then like a few weeks later, the 7T Pro.
Yeah.
In Europe.
Yeah.
And then
in Europe,
we got the McLaren version.
Right, yeah. It's kind of weird.
I wonder if they're going to do the same. Because you remember, they denied it. They were like, remember when they launched 17? We asked it, like, nope, no 17 Pro at all this year. It's not coming.
I don't know. I don't think there will be. I mean, enough has leaked about codenames and stuff so far that I think if it was out there, if it was coming, people would know. I think they just looked at the 8 Pro. They decided, okay, we could just have the higher bin chip. We could maybe give you more storage. We could maybe have the higher bin battery so it hits the max capacity instead of the typical one, which is what they did last year.
Yeah.
And they decided without carrier support in those key markets, it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah,
and it's kind
it
of
makes
understandable.
Sense.
If you're OnePlus, maybe you put the money towards these other devices that maybe might do more for you. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think for me, the vexing part or the sad part or the like annoying part is that, you know, because Google's not going to give me my flagship of all flagships ever. Right?
That's the sad thing, yeah.
Right, because Google is not. When the 8 Pro came out, I was like, of course I'm switching because this is finally, even though it's expensive for OnePlus, this is finally, it checks all the boxes that I want on a flagship phone. And it still doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Yet, there's not going to be a replacement now. And I'm like, where do I go from here personally? Do I go to Pixel 5? Do I go to OnePlus? Well, do I stay with OnePlus 8 Pro till next year and wait for a 9 Pro? I don't know. It's a tough one.
Go 5 months into the future. That's where you go.
So, speaking of OnePlus, who's the other big company in China that makes, like BBK Group, but makes a lot of phones?
Xiaomi?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, Xiaomi kind of intrigues me this year. They've always been really interesting, especially the Redmi brand. The Redmi brand, it just scratches my head all the time when I see a Redmi phone because I'm like, how do they make it this good and this cheap? But the Xiaomi, you know, they kind of do this weird thing where they launch the Mi main phone every year, and then they launch a T version, which is like almost half the price. And they just did that with the Mi 10T and Mi 10T Pro this week, like the day before the Pixels, which is really interesting. And the takeaway for me is that they're using a 144 hertz panel and a Snapdragon 865. Now, it's an IPS panel.
Okay. Hence the kind of chin down there.
But look at the pricing on these.
It's pretty wild,
Look at the specs and the pricing.
Yeah, it's the top model Mi 10T Pro, $700, 600 euros.
It's crazy. Mad. I mean, I'm on board, don't get me wrong. I just feel like they just live in a different universe here. Like, this is like, I know this is not coming to the US, but like, this is insane. Is this almost as good as a Poco F2 Pro if you're looking for that spec sheet, right? Like, you're not concerned about 5G working in the US or whatever. You're just somewhere abroad in India or in the UK maybe, and you just want 5G and you want like a really affordable flagship phone, right?
For sure, for sure. And I do wonder about that 144 hertz IPS though, and just 144 hertz in general, because if you look at the phones that have had it, like ROG Phone 3, unlike 120, there are kind of trade-offs with the panels that are out there right now.
You reviewed that, didn't you?
I did, and one thing you notice is that at lower brightness levels, you do get kind of that shadow crushing. So when you go below a certain brightness level, you lose the shadow detail. So if you're using your phone at night in bed, whatever, if you're watching, I don't know, a movie that has a lot of just, dark areas, a lot of shadows, it'll just be black. You'll have a really hard time figuring out what's in the shadows. So I do think probably with 144, we're not there yet, to be able to do that refresh rate in phones without other trade-offs. So I wonder if you're doing it with IPS in a phone this cheap, what is the, what's the downside there?
So I have a bit of experience with that because the Poco X3 NFC, we keep going back to this phone that I'm reviewing right now for Android Police, has a 120 hertz IPS panel.
Okay.
And it is very good. It is not as good as a 120 hertz OLED panel. And it's not, I'm not talking about the quality of the colors and the blacks. You're going to have a difference there. I'm talking purely about the 120 hertzness of it. Like scrolling is super smooth, but you do see a bit of that weird moire you get in some early implementations of OLED high refresh rate scrolling that we saw.
Oh, yeah.
There's some tweaking that needs to happen to make this, it's a $250 phone. Let's stop there, right? Like it's acceptable for $250. If this was a $500 phone, I'd be like, what's going on here? And here's my gut feeling after using for the first time an IPS panel that's a high refresh rate panel. You really want OLED, guys. Like if you want high refresh rate, you just stick with OLED.
I think that's just the rule in general. Just stick with OLED.
I agree with you 100%. But look, the reality is, the differences between these are basically in the cameras. There's a 108 megapixel on the Pro and a 64 on the T. They both have that 144 hertz IPS panel with a side-mounted fingerprint sensor, both Snapdragon 865, both 8 gigs of DDR5 RAM and UFS 3.1 storage is 256 gigs. So it's really good specs for the money. You also get 33 watt fast charging. So all kinds of interesting things. I think it's interesting. And I think Xiaomi is really pushing the envelope. Like, the next generation of this technology, they might still stick with IPS for these 120 and 144 hertz cheaper panels, but they might improve them. Like they might make them better. It's definitely a good display on the Poco, the 120 hertz version. It's not a great display. You know what I'm saying? Like that's, there's definitely a trade-off there. But I'm glad to see the refresh rate because it does feel smoother. That Poco X3 NFC feels as fast in UI with the 120 hertz IPS as the Poco F2 Pro with the 60 hertz OLED running a Snapdragon 865.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's a 732G. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because the next phone is really weird. The Mi 10T Lite, I guess.
Yeah, this is a bit of a wild card.
The same chassis almost. It's slightly different looking, but it's almost the same industrial design and chassis and display 120 hertz IPS as the Poco X3 NFC. And guess what? It's basically the only thing that's different is the chip. So instead of a 732G 4G chip, they have that brand new 750G 5G chip from Qualcomm that came out last week.
Yeah, and it's super surprising to see this although not the first time for Xiaomi, but it's surprising to see a chip announced and that suddenly it's just in a phone.
It's the second time now. They did it with the X3 NFC when it came out. It was literally announced the day of the Snapdragon 732G. And then this seems to be like within days of the 750G. It's really strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was looking at this chip when it was first announced thinking, okay, what are all the phones next year that are going to have this? Maybe Pixel 5a or, some OnePlus Nord successor or something like that. But yeah, super surprising.
I mean, I think it's exciting. I'm excited about it. I think it's hot. $328 US for that light version. So yeah. It's basically just slightly more expensive than maybe $50 more than the street price and the Poco X3 NFC. So there you go. You now have choices. If you live in those countries where you can buy these phones and get proper band support, which is always a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. one last thing I want to quickly touch on before we wrap up is that the LG Wing is finally officially, I know we knew it was coming to the US, but now that we know that there's a carrier, a date, and a price, Verizon, $9.99, pre-orders today, and shipping on October 15th. So if you want to be on the, and I'm going to get you to speak to this for a second, because you're holding it in your hand right now, the audience can't see that, but if you want to be adventurous and jump into the Wing, now you can pre-order it now if you're a Verizon customer for $9.99. Go nuts.
And at $9.99 it's a very interesting proposition. I mean, this is the start of LG's Explorer program, right? It's the start of them, although this kind of started with the dual screen stuff that they were doing, and it kind of has roots back to, the G Flex 2 and the LG G5 and all these other weird stuff, the weird phones that they produced. Now they're sort of getting fully behind making weird form factors and just seeing what sticks and actually having a brand name behind it. The Wing is the first of these. On the inside, all of the specs are the same as the LG Velvet, so solid specs, but nothing spectacular. Biggest thing you miss out on, especially at this price, is a faster screen. It's 60 Hz. It's not the most responsive 60 Hz, I will say, just like the Velvet.
LG's really got to go to higher refresh rates. Like, I can't believe that the V60, their flagship, I called it a pseudo flagship. Oh my God, the commentariat went crazy because I called it a pseudo flagship. I was like, 60 Hz is not a flagship phone. If you have an 865, I mean, the Poco F2 Pro is also 60 Hz with this 865, but it's a $400 phone, okay? So it's okay. But like for the V60, I was like, nope.
Yeah, and you got surely next year V70 is going to do something different. But yeah, LG Wing. This is all about having dual screen in a way that's a little bit different, a little bit unusual. So it's got this swivel phone on a hinge, this swivel display on a hinge. The main display rotates into landscape orientation, and you've got this secondary sort of square-ish display down below. And the idea is you can either watch full screen video, do a bunch of other stuff on the main display. You can tilt it around, so you can have a main sort of portrait app on the main display. You can either run a second app on the secondary screen, or have a video there or whatever. Or you can tip it upside down. You can have a giant full-size keyboard, use your thumbs to type, and have the document or whatever it is, or even a video on the top screen. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do there, and I think LG's obviously thought through a lot of this, because there are a bunch of apps that preloaded that take full advantage of it, like they load on the dual screen phones. But I think it feels like a very Generation 1 sort of product, like the early dual screen phones from LG did. And there's also a lot of Android that just isn't suited to this kind of multitasking.
And that's the problem, right?
Yeah. And it's also, this is a big, heavy phone. It's 6.8 something, I think, inches. And it's heavy. It's 260 grams.
Oh, wow.
This may be completely wrong. I don't have the spec sheet in front of me, but it's heavy.
But it sounds right. I think
it's heavier than the S20 Ultra, and that is a beefy phone.
Is it heavier than the Z Fold 2? That's what we need to look up.
Don't know. But it's big and it's chunky. But you do get the full uninterrupted screen. There's no notch. Has a pop-up camera, so pop-up camera taking selfies, and around the back, the camera setup there's a bunch of unique things that you can do because of the dual screen in combination with this camera module.
There's two ultra wides, right? And they're rotated 90 degrees from each other, correct?
Yeah, correct. So what you can do is you can flip it open and you can hold it ostensibly in portrait mode, and you can have a gimbal, a software gimbal that lets you either maintain stability.
So it's not a hardware gimbal. I thought they used the gimbal from the Vivo X50 Pro. So it's completely a software thing.
You can tell it's a software gimbal because it don't work too good in low light, because it's not. That's just the way it works. What they do have though, they have the IMX. They have a 64 megapixel main camera. I think it's the 686. I haven't confirmed.
Oh,
but
a Sony sensor for LG.
It's as good as the 686 is in other phones, so I think it's a 686, and I've been impressed so far. I haven't used this final model too much in low light, but even the pre-production one I had before that, pretty good in low light, and also pretty good just in general, leagues beyond what I was getting out of the Velvet. So I've been impressed with the camera so far.
Yes. Well, I'm super excited about this phone because of the form factor, and I don't think I would spend money on it, but it's good to see new, different form factors.
And that's the problem, right, with an LG phone, because people are expected to spend money on it. It's $1,000, right? Which I think is the problem.
Well, there are a few adventurous folks out there that'll be okay with it, and I think I commend their existence for spending the money, because we don't want to kill this idea that manufacturers should be experimenting.
Absolutely not. This phone itself, I think, is a very mixed bag. But the direction of travel for LG and the slider phone kind of thing that they teased at the end of the event for this, I very much want to see, and I hope they continue in this direction. Even though this, I don't think is necessary. This LG Wing isn't necessarily the idea that they should pursue for the rest of this Explorer program.
I think you're right. 100%. So, Alex, we should wrap up. Do you want to tell folks where they can find you on social and various, of course, Android Central, but do you want to elaborate what the URLs are and stuff?
Sure. So, yeah, you can find my stuff occasionally on Android Central. I'm mainly more video than written these days, although, I still write stuff there from time to time. So, AndroidCentral.com, you can find videos from me that I may have hosted, voiced over, shot, edited, whatever. YouTube.com/Android Central, and on all the social things, I am at Alex Dobie.
Yes, and you should all follow Alex because it's good content. I love your videos. They're very, very cool. And it's nice to get a different perspective from someone who's been in the industry for a while. But folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl, that's TNKGRL on Twitter and Instagram. It's like the comic book character, but without the vowels. So drop the vowels and follow me on Twitter. Discuss the show with me on Twitter. Ask me questions, comments. I'd love to know how you feel about that LG Wing, for example. That'd be interesting to know. And then Instagram is where you'll find pretty pictures of phones and pictures I've taken with these phones, so check that out. There's also a YouTube channel, youtube.com/MobileTech where you'll find some unboxing videos, some basically complimentary visual content to this audio podcast, so that if you want to, get your eyes on something sexy like Poco X3 NFC or whatever it might be, you can check that out there. Also, we have the URL for the show, so mobiletechpodcast.com. If you are just joining us for the first time, you want to subscribe, go to that URL. There you can subscribe on all the major platforms. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, pretty much everywhere. Please consider subscribing and join the party every week. And then if you have the ability in your podcast app to rate the show or review the show, consider doing that as well. It really helps others when they're browsing and looking for new content. Finally, there is a donate link in the show notes. If you can help the show or want to help the show, this is one great way to do it. Just click through in the show notes, and it's like a PayPal donate link, pretty straightforward stuff. Also, we have a partnership with Audible. And Audible's been with us for quite a while. So if you don't want to support with a donation, consider supporting by joining Audible. We have a special link and a special offer. The link is audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. If you click through and you're not already an Audible customer, you can help the show by helping Audible. And the way that works is you get a 30-day free trial and you get to keep a book at the end, whether you stay or not. And if you're new to Audible, I doubt you are, but if you are like me, an avid reader and you love books, sometimes you don't want to read, sometimes you want to listen. And that's what that platform is all about. They have the best selection of audiobooks. The thing that I like the most about Audible is that a lot of the books are read by the authors, and you can kind of immerse yourself in these crazy 11-hour long readings that you can interrupt into smaller pieces, and you have something to look forward to. Every day you're like, I'm going to listen to an hour, half an hour of this while I maybe go to sleep, and it just feels really nice. So check it out. Consider helping us out by helping Audible at audibletrial.com/mobiletech. I want to thank Audible for being our sponsor for a long time, and I also want to thank you, Alex, for being on the show again.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll definitely get you on the show sometime soon. And folks, there'll be another show next week, so stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.